מדינת ישראל נמצאת בעיצומה של מערכה.
We will not tolerate the firing of missiles on our cities and towns, and therefore I have ordered a significant broadening of the army's operation against the Hamas terrorists and the terrorists of other organizations in the Gaza Strip.
נגד המחבלים של שאר ארגוני הטרור ברצועת עזה.
I asked the Palestinians to put their differences aside and unify against the Israeli aggression. Netanyahu declared war on all Palestinians and the unified Palestinian government. After all the crimes and injustices practiced by the Zionist regime, the Palestinian resistance had no option but to respond.
We will go to all the international organizations and institutions to stop the aggression, and the Palestinian government will do its best to fulfill the human needs of our people, especially in Al-Quds and the Gaza Strip.
It's not a secret, unfortunately, that differences between the Prime Minister and me have lately become substantial and fundamental. They no longer enable the existence of a joint framework.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Between the Lines. I'm your host, Sergeant Preradovic. Well, the Israelis are gearing up for a lengthy offensive against Gaza. Its Air Force pounded targets across the Strip, killing dozens of civilians and injuring hundreds of others. Meanwhile, rockets fired by Palestinian resistance groups are hitting Israeli cities as far away as Tel Aviv and Haifa. This most recent escalation began with the apparent kidnapping and murder of 3 Zionist settlers in the West Bank, and then the killing of a Palestinian teenager, which followed. But have tensions been brewing since the recent failure of so-called US-backed peace talks? Well, to discuss this further, I'm now joined by a special group of guests here tonight. From the Gaza Strip, we have Mr. Harry Fear. He is a human rights activist and a filmmaker. From London, I am joined by Khaled Al-Tamimi. He is the Vice President of the General Union of Palestinian Students. And right here in the studio a little bit later on in the program, I'm going to be joined by Mr. Alberto Garcia Watson. He is a Beirut-based journalist and a political analyst. A warm welcome to all of you, gentlemen. Mr. Tamimi, if I can begin with you, do you think that Israelis will reoccupy the Gaza Strip?
Express and pass on my sincere condolences to all the families and friends of those that have been killed as a result of the continuous bombardment of the Gaza Strip and the continuous collective punishment and ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. We have witnessed that in Al-Quds, we have witnessed that in Ramallah, we have witnessed that in the occupied territories in Al-Nusra. And to answer your question, I do not think Israel will think about occupying the Gaza Strip, let alone entering the Gaza Strip with the 40,000 soldiers.
Well, Mr. Tamimi, if I can stop you right there, who is going to stop them? You say they won't even think about it. Who exactly is going to stop the Israelis from launching another incursion?
Israel have been clear that the recent offensive is to successfully demolish the infrastructure of Hamas. With Israel, we predict the unpredictable. But Hamas have put Gaza under siege for 7 years.
Okay, Mr. Tamimi, if I can stop you right there, because I do want to jump over.
Humanitarian aid.
I do want to jump over to the Gaza Strip right now and bring Harry Fear into the discussion here. Harry, many are predicting that this recent escalation will lead to a third intifada or a Palestinian uprising.
By some kind of unpredictable upsurge in civil action. So I think it's difficult to make a prediction on that. However, the field is sown for such a situation. Here in the Gaza Strip, the tension, the pressure on ordinary people has been building incredibly, devastatingly over the last 1 year. And of course, now the cherry on the top of that pressure cooker. In the West Bank, of course, we've had these extraordinary incidents with the Palestinian youth being tortured, killed. So I think that it isn't impossible.
Harry, this is just the latest in a long string of Israeli offensives against the Gaza Strip. We have 2008, 2012. The only difference in these operations is the name, actually. What do you think is going to be different this time around?
I would like to be somewhat optimistic, actually, in this respect. I think that over time, Israel's window of liberty in respect of how malicious it can behave, I believe that that's closing. I think that there is increased international pressure, including from the US, marginal. Don't get me wrong, but there is an increase in pressure, and that does have an effect when it comes to the Israeli cabinet deciding what to do. So I think that there is a possibility that this will not turn into a ground invasion, and this could be somewhat similar to the last war we saw in November 2012.
Right. Right, and Mr. Tamimi in London, do you agree with that? I mean, you said that you don't expect another ground incursion into Gaza. Do you think that this is going to die down in the next couple of days?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes, do you expect this latest Israeli operation to die down in the next couple of days?
Well, I mean, we hope so, but like I said before, with Israel, you have to expect the unexpected. Till now, there has been more than 50 deaths, 13 of them children and six of them women. More than 50 deaths, more than 350 have been wounded, 71 of them children and 66 of them women. 56 houses have been destroyed. And
yeah, Mr. Tamimi, I'm sorry to cut you off there, but we do have all of the numbers, we do have all of the statistics. There is one other factor here, which are the rockets being launched by Palestinian resistance groups into Israeli cities. Do you think that the Israelis perhaps are experiencing the kind of retaliation that they didn't expect here, that they perhaps bite off more than they can chew this time around?
Well, I mean, today some various media outlets, such as the BBC, had quite amusing headlines, such as Hamas strikes Israel. They make it seem like this is an unprovoked attack by Palestinians, and they forget the 60 years of occupation. They forget the wall in the West Bank. They forget the continuous settlements. They forget the siege on Gaza. I mean, peace and occupation are incompatible. They do not match. You must get rid of one for the other to prevail. Israel seem to think they have international immunity where they can kill whoever and whatever they want. At the beginning of June, the supposedly kidnapped and killed teenagers gave Israel a license to kill, a license to slaughter.
Okay, Mr. Tamimi, but my question to you, was about the rockets that are being fired onto Israeli cities by Palestinian resistance groups. Mr. Tamimi, if I can stop you right there. My question to you was specifically about these rockets that Palestinian resistance groups are firing against Israeli cities. Do you think that this demonstrates a new capability, if you will, on the part of groups like Hamas?
Well, Israel themselves have been shocked. There's a sense of surprise regarding Hamas, and not only Hamas, the Palestinian resistance, their capability to reach 100 kilometers and above into Israeli territories. Israel are in a sense of shock, they are in a sense of surprise. They have discovered new technology, they have discovered a new form of rockets that are being fired into Israel. And I think that answers your question when you asked before, do you think Israel will invade? Do you think Israel will occupy the Gaza Strip? I do not think so, because Israel has underestimated the will of the Palestinian people. They have underestimated the Palestinian resistance. And like the former leader once said, Yasser Arafat, as Palestinians will stand like mountains, and the strongest of winds will not shake us. Ya Jabal may hizzak rih.
Harry, in Gaza, you and I spoke about this last week. These 3 settlers who were allegedly kidnapped and killed. You said that this must have been one of the biggest coincidences in Middle Eastern history. Is it now becoming more clearer what this murder and this kidnapping was actually intended to do?
To be honest, I think it does remain a coincidence, but I guess given the increasingly bloody and ferocious context that we now find ourselves in, people will actually stop asking the questions about how this situation escalated and how we got here. People will basically just cut down the story to Hamas started lobbing all these rockets at Israel. Those situations that you just described, that of the 3 Israeli teens being kidnapped, killed, and of the Palestinian in the reprisal attack, I would say that people will not marry these events together. I would say that, of course, it is in Israel's strategic, in Israel's long-term strategy to hit Hamas in any way possible, be that assassinations overseas, be that here with airstrikes on infrastructure and personnel, or be that clamping down and arresting on Hamas individuals in the West Bank. Hamas is, to Israel, a terrorist organization and is primed to be targeted at any opportunity. So I think that Israel, for sure, did monopolize on all of these circumstances in order to hit Hamas hard.
Yeah, it certainly does seem that way. All right, gentlemen, do stay with me because we're going to jump to a quick break right now. We'll be back shortly.
On pavements and streets, by cars and near trees, we search the civilization and tradition. Around the corners of Beirut and Lebanon. We'll be exploring something different and something new. Through fantasy and simplicity. It is our job to bring out the magic of the busy life for you to see.
Evening. Women's rights redefined.
Welcome back. You're watching Between the Lines. Just a reminder, we're talking about that escalating violence in the Gaza Strip and the occupied Palestinian territories. We can now bring in Mr. Alberto Garcia Watson, the Beirut-based journalist and a political analyst. Mr. Watson, before we went to the break, we were actually discussing the kidnapping of those and murder of those 3 Zionist settlers in the West Bank. To what degree do you think Netanyahu used that incident to whip up public support for an escalation of this offensive on Gaza?
Well, definitely he used it. And as a matter of fact, today I even read a very interesting article that points out that probably he had knowledge about the death in the first hours of the kidnapping and he kept it secret.
He kept insisting it was a kidnapping, essentially. He kept insisting
Yes.
that they were taken, that the settlers were taken by Hamas, even though there was no evidence to support that.
There's still no evidence to support it, but from the first place, this comes from already some time earlier when the unity government was formed, and the anger that it was expressed by Israel in the forming of this government had to be destroyed. It had to be, to a certain extent, diminished, and it had to be a separation between Fatah, who has been working, let's say, as a puppet of the Israeli state for the past years, and that interest of Israel in ending that unity government took to the situation in which where the 3 kids kidnapped eventually escalated the whole thing. I think it is true that eventually this guy actually knew that these people were killed in the first hours of the kidnapping. He tried to keep it, as I said, this article is very complete and very interesting. He tried to keep it secret in order to escalate this whole situation, in order just to go against Hamas, who was pointed from the very beginning as the responsible for this kidnapping.
Mr. Tamimi in London, speaking of that Palestinian National Unity Government, of course, earlier this year, Hamas and Fatah signed an agreement to form that National Unity Government. Do you agree that this latest Israeli offensive against Gaza is aimed at breaking up that consensus government?
I mean, that's one of their key objectives, is to break the will of the Palestinian people. And I mean, the unity government is one step forward. The Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian leadership has been negotiating for more than 20 years, since the Oslo Agreement in 1993. The negotiations, or the peace talks as they say, have failed every time. As Palestinians go to the negotiation table with our hands behind our back and a gun to our head, we leave the negotiation table with 0 achieved. The settlements continue to expand, the wall continues to lengthen, and Israel continue to do as they like. The unity government will form one objective, it will form one aim. Enough is enough, and like many say, there will be no peace with no real justice, and that is the end of the occupation. That is with a real unity government, that is with real elections. Yesterday, the state TV, Palestine TV, whilst Gaza was being bombarded with Israeli rockets, displayed cartoons or children playing. That's unacceptable. Mahmoud Abbas has taken no real action. He declared that the Palestinian leadership will be meeting today evening. I think that's a bit too late, Mahmoud Abbas. More than 50 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, and you are still arranging for a meeting. The unity government will be a change, and a change for good.
Well, nevertheless, Mahmoud Abbas is still part of that unity government. Harry, how much of the blame should these different Palestinian factions take for the recent escalation in violence? Because despite this unity government, Hamas and Fatah follow very different lines when it comes to the Israelis.
Oh, entirely. I mean, the reconciliation government that we saw somehow coming together in its prime a few weeks ago, it really only came together on paper. There was not really any material evidences, really. It was just the very beginning of such coming together, a coming together which needs to be affected for the Palestinian cause. So I think that it's impossible really to make a judgment about to what extent these militant groups in Gaza are responsible, given the context of the fact that essentially if you listen to their positions and you listen to their ideologies, everything that they do, which the world may deem illegal or immoral or unacceptable or counterproductive, if you listen, then you hear that the root cause in their perspective is the occupation, and it is the ideology of Zionism. And that is the plain and simple truth. That is what these people believe, and that is what they believe they're fighting against. And that may seem to, certainly the Western world, far off, but that is what is believed here by these groups in Gaza.
And that ideology, Harry, I mean, we hear a lot about Israeli settlements, illegal Israeli settlements on the occupied territories, but the ideology of these settlers is very radical, is very extreme. For example, when these Jewish settlers were arrested for the murder of the Palestinian teenager last week, they were immediately depicted as terrorists and as extremists, as if the Israelis were trying to separate the majority of Israeli society from such actions. But how prevalent is that extremist ideology among the Israelis?
I would say that it's not widely prevalent among the general Israeli society. I was in Israel just this morning and this afternoon, actually. And if you listen to what ordinary people really want and how they see all of this, to be honest with you, they're not dramatically bothered by it. I mean, these rockets, looking at specifically the detail of today, these rockets don't really cause any kind of real effect for most Israelis. It just kind of is something that goes on in the background, and basically Israelis just carry on their lives in a very nicely developed state, in a beautiful place in the world. So their life very much continues on. Now there are, of course, the minorities who, for ideological reasons, political or religious reasons, are indeed militant, active, and zealous. And they are those, some of those settlers in the West Bank, some of the settlers in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, they are there for almost malicious ideological reasons. But that's actually not by any means the general Israeli society. However, there is a problem, I would say, in the general Israeli society, in at least having a problem in terms of the dehumanization of Palestinians. Palestinians are basically not seen as human. They're not seen as neighbors. And that's not wholly excusable by the fact that there are official enemies. It's not just about that. It's also, there is racism and there is Islamophobia.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Watson? Is it a racist society, that dehumanization, as Harry said there, of Palestinians among the Israelis?
Absolutely, absolutely. The kids are brought up already in school, taught that the Palestinians are actually an entity that just wants to find and look for the destruction of the state of Israel, that they want to just kidnap, like it happened eventually, and kill them and treat them with the worst atrocities you can imagine. So the fear of the Israelis from a very early age comes to a point that the hate just emerges, and then it comes also when these youngsters have to do the army. I mean, there's organizations of Israeli former soldiers that have created one specifically that is Breaking the Silence, and it's showing, they speak up about how they trained and how they taught that actually these people are not human. These people are actually just a bunch of terrorists that all deserve to die. I mean, that stands even in the Talmud, which is like the Bible. For the Jews, it talks about the Gentiles or the non-Jews deserving not to live and deserving actually to die. To a certain extent, some of these people are brought up with this religious atmosphere, an aura of radicalism towards any other groups. It's not just against the Palestinians, we see it also against the Sudanese. We see it against any other ethnia that is not the Jewish. They're definitely racist, and the apartheid is definitely installed in Israel and in the occupied territories indeed.
Mr. Tamimi in London, let's go back and to talk about President Mahmoud Abbas. As you mentioned earlier, now, President Mahmoud Abbas said on May 30th of this year, and I'm quoting here, he said that the security coordination with the Israelis is sacred, and we will continue it whether we disagree or agree over policy. Now, earlier we talked about a potential for another intifada, another uprising. Could Mahmoud Abbas be one of the reasons why we're not seeing another intifada?
Mahmoud Abbas isn't an obstacle. Mahmoud Abbas may have a different vision, he may have a different understanding. We are all used and familiar with his absurd statements. However, a third intifada is possible. And as your guests mentioned, the racist regime, the Israeli government continue a racist regime which continues to ethnically cleanse Palestinians. They oppress Palestinians.
Okay, Mr. Tamimi, let me stop you right there, because one of the points that you raised, Harry, I want to bring this over to you, that Mahmoud Abbas is not the problem. There would be many in the occupied territories that would disagree that Mahmoud Abbas is working very closely with the Israelis on a number of issues.
And recent polling showed that the Palestinian, generally speaking, the Palestinian people in the West Bank and in Gaza are against not just the Palestinian president himself, but also against the factions, Fatah and Hamas.
Mr. Watson, your thoughts on some of that there in terms of Mahmoud Abbas's and Fatah's role in the West Bank in suppressing any potential uprising or movements by the Palestinians?
I'm definitely certain that Mahmoud Abbas is not part of the solution. It's actually a big part of the problem. Mahmoud Abbas is playing like a puppet for Israel. Is not actually looking forward for the interests of most of Palestinians. I totally disagree with John, with Harry, sorry, about putting at the same level Fatah and Hamas. I've been several times to Gaza, just like Harry, and if you talk to the people in Gaza, most of the people would actually vote again for Hamas. Let's not forget that Hamas arrived to power in free elections in 2005. And Mahmoud Abbas now is the president of the Palestinian National Authority de facto.
Right.
So is de facto with the total sympathy of Israel. Israel wants to have Mahmoud Abbas, and what I believe that the approach of Mahmoud Abbas in trying to find these three settlers and all the aims and all the efforts made by Mahmoud Abbas is to show that well, he's present, he's working for them, and he would be actually very happy seeing Hamas out of this scenario. That's definitely the way that I see it, and that's the way that many people in Gaza see it too.
Harry, your response, do you agree with that? I mean, that's a fair point. If Hamas is very likely to be re-elected again. Okay, I'm afraid that we've lost the sound there with Harry.
I beg your pardon. I was just saying that I agree with your partial disagreement of what I said. The polls do show that Palestinians are widely discontented with Fatah and Hamas and the stale Palestinian political atmosphere, and with the Palestinian president himself. However, it is indeed true that if you speak to average people on the street, you get the impression that they are supporting the authorities that are in power in Gaza.
Okay, I'm afraid that we are having some sound problems there. We're having a bit of trouble hearing Harry. I want to jump over to London, Mr. Tamimi. Where do you think this leaves President Abbas, this latest Israeli offensive against Gaza? Where does that leave Abbas and this unity government?
Well, I think you've moved away from the real objective of this show. We're here to discuss the criminal acts of Israel and not what Mahmoud Abbas thinks or may think, or what
with all due respect, Mr. Tamimi, we're here to discuss all the different facets and aspects and elements of what's currently going on in the occupied Palestinian territories. That includes the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank.
Mahmoud Abbas must take one step and one step only. He must go to all the international organizations possible. He must sign all the relevant documents possible. He must approach the international courts of justice, the international criminal courts. Israel must be accountable for every single war crime it has committed. Israel seems to think it has international immunity. It is Mahmoud Abbas's duty. It is President Abbas's duty to put a stop to that. Israel does not have international immunity.
Yeah, but he hasn't carried out
Israel
that duty,
must be
Mr.
held
Tamimi,
accountable.
has he?
Must be held accountable for every war crime it has committed. Israel continues to disregard international law. Israel continues to disregard human rights. Israel continues to disregard every single agreement between the Israeli government and Palestinian officials. Mahmoud Abbas, like every single Palestinian, has been put into a corner where he has to put his hand up and say, I do not know whether Israel want peace or whether Israel want destruction. Israel lives on bloodshed, and it has become clear to Mahmoud Abbas and the leadership that they do not want peace, and it is Mahmoud Abbas's duty to take the next step. And like I said,
then, Mr.
that
Tamimi,
is the
is Mahmoud
International
Abbas
Court
still
of Justice and the
cooperating
International
with the
Criminal
Israelis
Court.
on a security level? Why then is Mr. Mahmoud Abbas still cooperating with the Israelis on a security level?
From day one, Mahmoud Abbas cooperated with the Israeli government because he, as I do, believes there is no free teenagers that were killed by Palestinians. They may have died from natural causes. They may not even be dead. So as they say, Mahmoud Abbas played along with Israel's show or display of, or their attempt to display themselves as victims in this whole scenario. Maybe Mahmoud Abbas's method was wrong. It may have been a more effective for him to take a different approach or method, but like I said, Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian leadership, I, as a Palestinian, believe there was no teenagers abducted, there was no teenagers killed, and that was a license. It was a license for Israel to kill, for Israel to massacre innocent Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. It was a license for Israel to destroy the infrastructure of the Palestinian resistance. It was a license for Israel to kill and destroy the will of Palestinian people, and we have witnessed that not only in Gaza, we have witnessed that in the West Bank and the occupied territories.
Okay,
Israel
Mr.
has
Tamimi,
one
let me
objective,
bring
and
the
that is
discussion back
bloodshed.
to the studio for a moment. I will come back to you. Mr. Watson, do you agree with that, some of that, what Mr. Tamimi is saying there, that Mahmoud Abbas has his back against the wall, that like all other Palestinians, he's in a difficult situation?
I don't think he's in a difficult situation. The opposite. I think he's in a very comfortable situation. He's not the only one that wants Hamas out of the picture. As a matter of fact, when John Kerry was here making a visit just 3 weeks ago to Beirut, he was questioned in a press conference about if Israel does not accept this unity government and what's the United States going to do about it. And he said that he had compromised on the promise, Mahmoud Abbas, that no members of Hamas will participate from that government. And this is 24 hours after 5 Hamas ministers had sworn in their position in the new government. So what I see is that Hamas is very uncomfortable, not just for the Israelis, it's very uncomfortable for Mahmoud Abbas. And Mahmoud Abbas will do any effort to contribute and to collaborate with the Israeli authorities to get rid of Hamas. That's the way that I see it, and that's the way many people see it. I would not like to say the very strong word, but by many people, especially in Gaza, he's considered to be a traitor. And I would not go that far, but definitely he is contributing, he's not condemning with enough energy what is going on with the genocide that for the past 3 days is happening in Gaza. And as I say, and I repeat, I think that he's in a very comfortable position to see Hamas disappearing from the stronghold that is Gaza at times where actually Israel wants to sweep from the map, not just Hamas, because as a matter of fact, I truly believe that Israel has the intention of annex both territories, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. That's a project already by Ben-Gurion of the creation of the big Israel, and this is just one more step into that project.
Okay, unfortunately, we do have to go to another break right now. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
abortion and climate change, medicine manipulation, genetically modified food, the destruction of wildlife, and corporate exploitation. These are all part of a new terrorism threatening our future.
Eco-terrorism, global awakening to a world under threat.
Depth, clarity, substance. Beyond the discourse.
Beyond politics, beyond the shallowness of everyday politics.
Welcome back here with Between the Lines. Just a reminder, we're talking about the Israeli offensive against the Gaza Strip. And to continue this discussion, going back to Harry in Gaza. Harry, we talked about the Palestinian government. Let's talk about the Israeli cabinet. We have the Israeli Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman. He's the leader of the far-right Israel Beit Anu party. He pulled out of an alliance with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party because he thought Netanyahu wasn't being tough enough on the Palestinians in Gaza. How much pressure is Netanyahu under to reoccupy Gaza?
Certainly by those to the right of Israeli politics itself, the politics of the country itself, he is under a lot of pressure. I would say among the population as a whole, that pressure isn't so intense, as I alluded to earlier. But he is under pressure, and I think that the pressure directly affected what happened here in Gaza over the last few days. I don't think there's any doubt about that at all. Israeli politics does work in that kind of organic way. The pressure did exact an effect. And here we see an effect. We see Israel targeting Palestinian homes. So by all means, it was a clear escalation in the Israeli approach to Gaza, for sure.
Mr. Watson, do you agree with that? And do you think that that pressure will force Netanyahu into some sort of a reoccupation, a fresh incursion into the Gaza Strip?
I do believe it. I do believe it, especially knowing the profile of Avigdor Lieberman. Avigdor Lieberman is a radical, is a racist, is a person that when he actually, 6 years ago, I believe it was, in those elections 6 years ago, or 7, actually made a campaign talking about the best way to solve the problem with Gaza was just to throw an atomic bomb. You know, smoke them out, kill them all, and intervene, occupying that territory. As I say, he puts a lot of pressure definitely on Netanyahu. Netanyahu has been showing some sort of weakness to a certain extent in comparisons with what Avigdor Lieberman wants as an aim for the occupied territories. So I will see actually that even though with the support of most of the population in Israel, to the policies of radicalism towards the territories, the occupied territories. I mean, we see it, for example, with the Pillar of Defense. The Pillar of Defense with 75,000 reservists in the border with Gaza. Polls showed that the majority of the population wanted a ground offensive.
That's right.
And that was shortly before elections.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think the Israelis have a sustainable security, if you want it, so-called security status quo?
Well, I would not say that that's actually security. That's very much the opposite. But in their eyes, as I said at the beginning, they're brought up with the fear, with the hate towards this other group of people, with this other ethnic race and Islam that represents a big danger in their eyes to Judaism and to their own existence. So more and more people are turning their backs against this situation. I mean, half the budget goes in defense in Israel, and it's a lot of voices totally complaining and demonstrating against this radical positions against the Palestinians. However, still think that the big majority of Israelis at this point want to have a tough hand against the Palestinians, want to have an intervention as soon as possible. It's not just Avigdor Lieberman. He's the voice of many people that I believe by ignorance are taking this position.
Harry, I see you're shaking your head there. Go ahead, jump in.
I was indeed. No, I do agree. I would say that a ground invasion of Gaza is not going to happen. We see that the troop build up around the borders of Gaza. This is entirely, on one level, a psychological warfare tactic, and on another level, simply Israel mobilizing its army to be ready to do anything. And God knows Israel is capable of doing anything. But I don't think it's within the horizon by any means that Israel would invade Gaza with ground troops. There are far too many variables against that possibility, not least the fact that Israel would lose all international support immediately, and also the fact that Israel would actually encounter enormous resistance from people in Gaza, and not just those.
But is that really the case, Harry? Because there is really nobody rushing to the aid of the Palestinians in Gaza. There's nobody out there shouting, telling the Israelis to stop this offensive against Hamas. As a matter of fact, the Americans, the United Nations, all the big international players are being very casual about it. They're urging restraint.
I think that's indeed true to an extent. I think that if Israel were to actually invade Gaza, that would be inevitably extraordinarily bloody. Inevitably, that would certainly have the European states, including countries like the UK, bitterly go against the Israeli position, calling for massive restraint and etc. It wouldn't be, I believe, so balanced, calling both sides to restraint, but it would be clearly against Israel's reaction or Israel's policy. And then I think the United States would follow to an extent in the same way, to an extent. And I think that Israel would, I think Israel, and I think but by all means, Benjamin Netanyahu and those in his cabinet know that a ground invasion of Gaza would basically destroy Israel's what the cabinet and what Israelis call Israel's perceived moral legitimacy.
Mr. Watson, looking at it from a regional context, the ongoing conflict in Syria, of course, the turmoil in Egypt, can Netanyahu really afford to fan the flames with Hamas at this point?
I think very much Israel is taking, and Netanyahu is taking advantage of all this situation. We see that strong nations that were very much a danger for the existence of Israel suffering a turmoil at this point. We're talking about Syria, we're talking about Iraq, we're even talking about these threats against Iran with a nuclear program. I think it's in the best interest of Israel to keep those countries fighting each other, to keep civil wars going on, to keep territories like Kurdistan, which Israel keeps excellent relations and trading with oil at this point as a very big interest for Israel. I don't think that it's a lot of pressure for Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu is very much interested in the situation from happening. I mean, we've seen even Netanyahu visiting the ISIL terrorists in the Golan Heights hospitals. So what I see is that at this point, it's in the interest of Netanyahu and in the interest of Israel this whole turmoil all around. We see also one of the biggest and most important armies in the area, which is the Egyptian. At this point, it's quiet. At this point, we see Al-Sisi very much in the aura of Israel. Even before the coup d'état, he happened to meet with Shimon Peres and Netanyahu. He even received a prize. So at this point, I think that Netanyahu is very much in control of all these nations, and these turmoils are actually benefiting Netanyahu.
Mr. Tamimi in London, there is one big difference this time around, and what we saw in 2012, 2008 perhaps, is that there are fewer regional players to mediate any kind of a potential ceasefire between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Would you agree?
Well, I personally think this time around the ceasefire is not the solution. The solution is for Israel to end the siege on Gaza, When you talk about Gaza, you talk about a region which is 25 meters in length and 6 meters wide, with a population of 1.7 million, with 20,000 Palestinians living per square mile. I don't think a ceasefire is a solution. I think there will be no peace with no real justice. This real justice is the end to the occupation, to the end of the siege on Gaza. It is the duty of the Egyptian authorities to open the Rafah crossing, which has been closed for more than 175
do you think that they will, Mr. Tamimi? Do you think that they will open that crossing? Because everything we've seen from Sisi so far implies that there is very little sympathy for Hamas in Cairo at the moment.
I think Egypt are being very cautious, and they are playing the waiting game. They are playing the waiting game to see how long Israel will sustain their attack, how long the Palestinian resistance will keep resisting. And quite frankly, El-Sisi must take action now. He must open the border crossing to allow those injured to access Egypt, to access hospitals, to access aid, which is not available in Gaza. Gaza has been under siege for more than 7 years. Humanitarian aid has been blocked. Medical aid has been blocked. It is Egypt's duty. It is the duty of the international community. It is the duty of the Arab world.
Okay, Mr. Tamimi, we are unfortunately running a little bit short on time, so I want to get Mr. Watson's thoughts on some of that there. With this uncompromising stance in Cairo, Mr. Watson, towards the Muslim Brotherhood and of course Hamas, which we know is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. Who do you turn to talk everyone off the ledge at this point?
I first want to make a little correction. Yesterday the border in Rafah, the Rafah crossing was open to allow wounded people from Gaza to reach medical care and hospitals in Egypt. I mean, this is just a little gesture. It's a little gesture of Al-Sisi. However, it represents a little drop in the ocean, because Al-Sisi has shown already from the very beginning its rejection towards not just Hamas, but even the entire Palestinian and the Gaza Strip in
he's gone much further than that. For the very first time, Cairo has actually declared this organization a terrorist group.
Yes, they have. But I also have to say one thing. I mean, Morsi made possible with the opening of the crossing, the Rafah crossing, that the aid and the help could reach Gaza. As a matter of fact, the first times that I arrived to Gaza was under Morsi's government. But let's not forget that in the last months of Morsi's government, he started bombing the tunnels too. He started closing also the Rafah border, and he started implying very much towards the Western positions and orders. So I don't see at this point as a very good possibility that Al-Sisi will turn, like at a certain point Morsi did, to the Palestinians and to the Gazans specifically. I think is a big possibility that he's going to keep blocked and locked any crossing and any possibilities. This yesterday was just a gesture to show that he is very much like who he wants to imitate in history, which is Gamal Nasser. But he has nothing to do with Nasser, because Nasser actually was a big hater of Zionists, and this guy seems to be pretty much linked to them.
Okay, Mr. Tamimi, let's have your final thoughts here with this seemingly endless cycle of violence. Where do we go from here? What's the solution? What does Gaza look like in the next couple of weeks and months?
Well, I would like to end by again expressing and sending my sincere condolences to all the families and friends of those that have died as a result of the constant bombardment of the Gaza Strip and the collective punishment in the West Bank and occupied territories. My sincere condolences go on behalf of the General Union of Palestinian Students. They go on behalf of every Palestinian in the United Kingdom. I mean, in 2008, we witnessed Operation Cast Lead, where 1,500 Palestinians were killed, 5,000 were injured, and 20,000 were left homeless. 3,500 homes were destroyed. We hope that this is not the case this time round. I would like to send a message to the Palestinian resistance Do not let Israel destroy your will. Israel's main objective is to destroy the infrastructure of the Palestinian resistance. Their second objective is to destroy the will of the Palestinian people. And just to go back to a question you asked previously in the show, the 40,000 soldiers that were deployed across the Gaza borders, I think this is a psychological war. Israel will not invade. It will not invade Gaza. Again, with Israel, you have to expect the unexpected. It is a barbaric death machine.
Yes, Mr. Tamimi, it most certainly is. Unfortunately, Mr. Tamimi, I do have to stop you there because we have run out of time. I do want to thank all of my guests, of course, Mr. Alberto Garcia Watson, Beirut-based journalist and a political analyst. From Gaza, we were joined by Harry Fear. He's a human rights activist and filmmaker. And of course, last but by no means least, Mr. Khaled Al-Tamimi in London, the Vice President of the General Union of Palestinian Students. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for being here today. And of course, I want to thank you for watching. Don't forget that you can catch us again at the same time next week.
Cities and towns, and therefore I have ordered a significant broadening of the army's operation against the Hamas terrorists and the terrorists of other organizations in the Gaza Strip.
I asked the Palestinians to put their differences aside and unify against the Israeli aggression. Netanyahu declared war on all Palestinians and the unified